The police sergeant thought he was adopting one silent German shepherd. But when the shelter doors opened, she refused to step outside. She was not afraid of the snow, the cars, or the man holding her leash. She kept looking back, toward a hallway no visitor was supposed to enter. What she left behind was not a toy, not a memory, and not just an old blanket. It was another life depending on her to stay. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like, share, and subscribe for more K9 Justice Tales. By the time Sergeant Camden Brooks Rolston finished his shift, the snow had already begun to brighten the town instead of burying it. That was how winter came to White Harbor, Vermont. Not all at once, not like a disaster in the beginning, but with a clean white patience that softened rooftops, filled the gutters, and made every streetlight glow as though someone had placed a lantern behind the glass. The storm from the night before had moved east before dawn, leaving the small town polished and quiet beneath a blue-white morning sky. Camden drove slowly along Main Street with both hands on the wheel, even though the roads had already been cleared. His patrol radio sat low and silent beside him. The last call of his shift had been an elderly man whose furnace pilot light had gone out. Nothing criminal, nothing dramatic. Just a cold kitchen, a frightened voice, and a neighbor who had not wanted to bother anyone until the temperature inside dropped low enough to make his fingers ache. That was the kind of policing Camden understood best now. He was 46, tall, broad through the shoulders, with the controlled athletic build of a man who still trained because his body remembered danger even when his life had grown quieter. His face was rugged without being handsome in any easy way. The bridge of his nose bent slightly from an old break. His jaw stayed clean under a faint shadow of stubble. His dark brown hair was cut short and neat, police style, with the top brushed slightly to one side. People often noticed his eyes first, sharp blue-gray, steady enough to calm a room, tired enough to suggest he had once seen more than he spoke about. In the passenger seat lay his winter duty jacket, dark navy with a small department patch on the sleeve. Camden was no longer in full uniform. The vest, belt, and radio mic were locked at the station. What remained on him was a dark field jacket, a gray sweater, black jeans, and the same black boots he wore through most of the winter. He looked more like a man trying to go home than a police officer trying to carry authority into another building. Still, habit stayed with him. At every intersection, he looked left, right, then past the obvious line of traffic to the shoulders and storefront reflections. He watched the doors of the diner, the alley beside the pharmacy, the man scraping snow off a windshield with one bare hand. He had spent too many years learning that safety was not a feeling, it was a sequence. A door checked, a hand visible, a clear path out. The house waiting for him sat beyond the north edge of town, a one-story place near a stand of dark pines where the wind moved hard across the open field. Camden had shoveled the back path before leaving for his shift, though no dog had used it in almost 2 years. The motion had become part of him. Push the shovel, clear the step, scrape the ice from the threshold, leave the route open. Atlas had needed that route near the end. Camden did not let himself think the name often, but it lived in the house anyway. It lived in the old leash still hanging from a hook in the mudroom. It lived in the water bowl tucked in the lower kitchen cabinet, clean and dry, though Camden could not bring himself to give it away. It lived in the black wristwatch on his left hand, the one he had used to mark medication times when Atlas's back legs began failing by degrees. Atlas had been his canine partner for years before retirement softened him into something slower, grayer, and more dependent. People liked the stories from the working years, the searches, the commands, the night calls, the time Atlas found a lost child behind a frozen storage shed before the temperature dropped below zero. Camden remembered those too, but love, he had learned, did not end in the brightest stories. It ended in towels by the door, medicine split into morning and night doses, rubber mats on the floor so old paws would not slide, and a man sleeping lightly because a dog might need water at 2:08 a.m. It ended in knowing the difference between pain and stubbornness. It ended in a quiet veterinary room with one hand behind Atlas's ears and the other gripping a collar that had already outlived the body that wore it. After that, Camden had made the house neat. Too neat, Evelyn Marsh had told him once. Evelyn was the night dispatcher at the department, 58, red hair going silver around the temples, a voice that could steady a panicked caller through a burning kitchen or a lost child in a grocery store. She had come by after Atlas died with a covered dish and no speeches. She had stood in his living room, looked at the empty dog bed still against the wall, and said, "Camden, grief is allowed to leave things messy." He had thanked her for the food and changed the subject. Months later, the department therapist had said something similar with softer language. Not that he needed another dog. Not that Atlas could be replaced. Just that Camden might consider stepping into a shelter one day, if only to see what his body did when it heard breathing on the other side of a kennel door. He had kept the address in his phone for 11 weeks. Pine Hollow Animal Rescue sat just outside White Harbor, where the town thinned into barns, snowfields, and maple trees. Camden had passed the sign dozens of times without turning in, a blue wooden board with white letters, a fenced side yard. A low building with warm yellow light behind the windows. On clear days, volunteers walked dogs along the edge of the property, where the snowbanks stood like folded blankets. That afternoon, he slowed before the entrance. A plow truck passed him, throwing a loose spray of snow across the shoulder. Camden let it clear, then turned into the parking lot before he could talk himself out of it again. He parked at the far corner. From there he could see the front doors, the side gate, and the road leading back to town. He sat with the engine off while the ticking heat faded from the dashboard. Through the windshield, he watched a young couple come out, carrying a cardboard box with air holes punched along the side. A child in a red hat pressed both mittened hands to one of the holes and whispered something inside. Camden looked down at his watch. No medication time now, no feeding schedule. No old dog waiting for the sound of his boots. Only an empty house and the possibility of making it less empty. He almost started the truck again. Then a bark rose from inside the shelter, deep, brief, and cut short by another dog's higher voice. Camden closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, he took the keys from the ignition and stepped out into the cold. Inside, the shelter smelled of disinfectant, wet fur, laundry soap, and the faint metallic scent of winter carried in on boots. The lobby was small but warm. A bulletin board near the desk held photographs of adopted animals, holiday donation flyers, and a handwritten sign asking visitors not to place fingers through kennel gates. A woman looked up from behind the counter. She was in her 30s, with chestnut hair tied low at the back of her neck and a pencil tucked behind one ear. Her forest green shelter jacket had a name badge pinned slightly crooked over the pocket. "Sergeant Rolston?" she asked. "Camden is fine," he said. "I'm Natalie Roan." She came around the desk and offered a hand. Her grip was practical, warm from the office heater. "I'm the behavior specialist here. I read your application, but I prefer not to trust forms more than people." "That sounds fair. It can be less comfortable than a form," he almost smiled. "I figured." Natalie led him into a small consultation room with 2 chairs, a desk, and a window looking toward the side yard. Camden chose the chair nearest the door without thinking. Natalie noticed but did not comment. She asked about his house first. Fenced yard, 1 level. No children, no other pets. Quiet road. He told her his schedule changed when storms hit or when the department was short, but most days he was home by late afternoon. He gave Evelyn's name as an emergency contact before Natalie had to ask. "You were a K9 handler," she said, glancing at the form. "I was. Are you looking for a working dog?" "No." Natalie looked up. Camden rested his hands loosely between his knees. "I'm not looking for commands, drills, bite work, tracking, or anything that belongs to the department. I don't need a dog to be useful." For a moment, the room became quiet enough for him to hear the distant scrape of a bucket in the kennel hall. Then he added, "Because it seemed important not to lie inside a building full of animals that had already heard too many human half-truths. I just want a dog that can live in my house without being asked to become someone else." Natalie's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. The clipboard lowered slightly. "That helps," she said. The first dog she introduced was a broad yellow mix named Martin, who greeted Camden as if they had survived a shipwreck together and were being reunited on the dock. Martin's tail struck the side of the playroom wall hard enough to rattle a mop handle. He tried to climb into Camden's lap with all 80 pounds of himself. Camden caught him before they both lost balance. Natalie folded her arms. "He believes emotional boundaries are a paperwork error." This time Camden did smile, though only at one corner. The second dog was a white and brown hound who sniffed Camden's boots, approved of them, and immediately lost interest when a volunteer walked past with a treat pouch. A small terrier came next, sharp-eyed and trembling with the need to move. All of them were good dogs. Camden knew that. He knew it with the same certainty he knew that goodness was not always the same as belonging. They moved into the kennel corridor. Sound gathered around him at once. Barking rose from both sides, some eager, some anxious, some warning him away from a grief he had no right to judge. Dogs pressed noses against gates. Paws scraped metal. Tags rang against bowls. A young shepherd mix spun in a tight circle, stopped, then spun again. Camden kept his shoulders loose. He had learned long ago not to stare directly at a dog in distress, unless he wanted to make the distress about himself. Natalie walked beside him without filling the noise with chatter. She named dogs only when Camden paused. She gave small, useful details: shy with men, good with cats, needs a fenced yard, startles at trucks, loves older women, hates umbrellas for reasons unknown to science. Near the end of the last row, Camden slowed before he knew why. A German shepherd sat at the back of her kennel. She was not large for the breed, but she carried herself with a stillness that made her seem stronger than the dogs throwing themselves against the gates. Her coat was black and cold brown, the darker saddle lying heavy across her back, the tan on her legs muted by the shadowed light. Her ears stood alert, her face was dark through the muzzle, with intelligent amber-brown eyes that did not beg and did not challenge. A brass tag hung from her collar. Lark. "She's 5, Natalie said quietly. "Brought in 3 weeks ago." Camden did not move closer. Owner surrender? Animal control. Rural property outside town. No chip, no one came forward. Lark looked at him, not for long, just enough to measure him. Then her ears turned toward the rear hallway. Camden followed the movement with his eyes. Beyond the kennel row, a staff-only door stood closed beneath a red exit sign. A cart rattled somewhere behind it, then stopped. Lark did not approach the gate. She simply listened as if some part of her remained in that direction, waiting for a sound to return. "She always do that?" Camden asked. Natalie's answer came a beat late, often enough that I've noticed. He looked back at Lark. Most dogs in shelters ask something of a person right away. Release, food, touch, distance, a chance. Lark asked nothing. That unsettled him more than need would have. "Can I meet her?" Natalie studied the dog before she studied him. Yes, outside. No pressure. The meeting yard was tucked behind the building, enclosed by a wooden fence with snow gathered along its base. A bench sat beneath a bare maple. Paw tracks overlapped across the packed white ground, some frantic, some wandering, all slowly filling with new flakes drifting down from the branches. Camden stood near the gate while Natalie brought Lark out on a loose leash. The shepherd stepped into the yard and stopped. She did not look at him first. She checked the fence line, the latch, the bench, the corners where snow had drifted high. Her nose moved over the air. Her eyes lifted once toward the window where a volunteer's shadow passed behind the glass. Camden went to the bench and sat sideways, one boot planted in the snow, one hand resting on his knee. He did not call her name. Names, he knew, meant different things depending on who had spoken them before. Natalie handed him a treat. He placed it on the snow halfway between them. Lark looked at the treat, then she looked toward the building. The rear wall gave off a hum from the heating system. Somewhere inside, a metal door clicked. Lark's ears sharpened. The line of her back changed, not with fear, but with attention so complete It seemed to pull the whole yard toward that sound. Camden felt something move under his ribs. Not alarm, not yet. Recognition. He had seen dogs wait before. Not simply stay, not simply obey, but wait with their whole bodies arranged around the absence of someone they expected to appear. The sound inside faded. Only then did Lark step forward. She took the treat without haste and sniffed the snow near Camden's boot. She moved along his side, close enough that the fur at her shoulder brushed the seam of his jeans. He kept still. A crow called from the trees beyond the fence. A truck passed on the road. Lark tracked both sounds, then returned to his boot. For several minutes, nothing happened. It was the first peaceful thing Camden had felt all day. At last, Lark lowered herself beside his leg. Not fully against him. Not trusting that much. But close enough that her shoulder touched the leather of his boot and stayed there. Camden looked down at her without moving his hand. Atlas had once leaned like that after hard calls, when adrenaline left Camden too quickly and silence rushed in behind it. Not for comfort, exactly. For grounding. A reminder that the world still had weight, breath, warmth. Camden's fingers tightened once on his knee. Lark noticed. Her eyes shifted up. "Sorry," he said, so quietly Natalie may not have heard. The shepherd watched him for another second, then rested her chin near the toe of his boot. Natalie stood several yards away, giving them the dignity of not turning the moment into a test. Camden finally lifted 2 fingers and touched the fur behind Lark's shoulder. Lightly, asking, not taking. Lark did not move away. Snow began to fall again in small bright pieces that caught on her black coat and disappeared into the warmer brown at her neck. Camden sat there, one hand hovering near a dog he had not meant to need, and felt the strange ache of a door opening inside him before he was ready to walk through it. When Natalie eventually stepped closer, she did it slowly. "She usually keeps more distance," she said. Camden looked down at Lark, who had shifted just enough to pin the edge of his bootlace beneath one paw. "She may be waiting to see if I make bad decisions," he said. Natalie smiled. "Most of our better dogs do." Lark's ear flicked at the sound of her voice, but her body stayed beside Camden. The sky over White Harbor brightened as the snow eased. Beyond the fence, the shelter windows glowed with afternoon light. Camden knew nothing had been promised yet. No adoption had been approved in that yard. No house had changed. No grief had been solved by a dog resting beside a boot. But when he stood, he did so carefully, because Lark had not moved her paw from his lace, and for the first time in nearly 2 years, Camden found himself waiting for a dog to decide whether he was allowed to leave. The approval came with a checklist, not a blessing. Camden appreciated that. 2 days after he first met Lark, Natalie Roan arrived at his house in a shelter van with snow dried along the wheel wells and a clipboard tucked beneath one arm. Camden had already cleared the driveway twice that morning, though only a thin dusting had fallen since dawn. He had swept the porch, salted the back step, and closed every room except the living room, kitchen, and mudroom. The house looked prepared in the same careful way his reports looked prepared. Accurate, ordered, and missing the part that made a thing alive. Natalie did not praise him for the cleanliness. She walked through quietly, noting the fenced yard, the single-level layout, the narrow back step, the slick strip of wood between the kitchen and the hallway. She crouched once to run her fingers over the floorboards. "Runners here would help," she said. "For Lark, for any dog coming into a new place, less slipping, fewer surprises." She looked up, and if she turns out to be nervous at thresholds, texture helps. Camden wrote that down. Natalie watched the pen move across his small notebook. "You take notes on everything?" "Only things I don't want to fail." The sentence came out more plainly than he intended. Natalie did not soften it for him. She only nodded, as if the answer belonged in the file too. On the kitchen counter, Camden had left the emergency contact form. Evelyn Marsh's name stood in block letters beneath his. When Natalie asked about her, Camden called from the house phone so the shelter would not be relying on a name written by a man who wanted approval too badly. Evelyn answered on the 3rd ring with the background murmur of the White Harbor dispatch room behind her. "Marsh. It's Camden." Natalie Roan from Pine Hollow is here. She needs to confirm you're willing to be listed as backup care." "For the shepherd?" Evelyn asked. "Yes." There was a pause, and Camden could picture her turning away from the radio board, one hand cupped over the receiver, red and silver hair pinned behind her headset. "I'm willing," Evelyn said, "and I know the difference between giving a dog a bowl of food and actually checking whether she ate it." Natalie smiled faintly. Evelyn continued, "I also know where Camden keeps his spare key because he once locked himself out during an ice storm and tried to pretend it was a tactical decision." Camden closed his eyes. That was one time. It was memorable. Natalie wrote something on the form. "Have you cared for dogs with medical or mobility needs?" "My old beagle went blind the last 3 years," Evelyn said. Her voice changed there, still steady but lower. Furniture stayed where it was. Water stayed on the same mat. Medicine at 7 and 7. You speak before you touch them. You don't grab a sleeping old dog and expect forgiveness just because you meant well. Natalie looked at Camden with a kind of approval he had not asked for. "That answers my question," she said. After the call ended, the house seemed less empty for a moment, as if Evelyn's voice had left a practical warmth behind. Natalie finished the inspection without sentiment. She asked about shift changes, storms, overnight calls, visitors, food storage, the nearest veterinary clinic. Camden answered each one. What he could not answer was whether Lark would want anything he had prepared. Natalie closed the file on the porch. "I'll approve the adoption," she said. The words landed quietly. Camden looked past her to the yard, where wind moved loose snow along the fence in silver threads. For a second he expected relief. Instead, he felt the old fear step closer. Approval meant possibility had crossed into responsibility. It meant a bowl would come out of the cabinet. A leash would hang where atlases had hung. A living creature would learn the sounds of his house, and one day he would learn the sounds of her pain. Natalie seemed to understand enough not to congratulate him too loudly. "Come tomorrow afternoon," she said. "We'll go slowly." The next day, sunlight scattered hard and white across the shelter parking lot. Snow sat high along the fence, but the sky had cleared to a pale winter blue. Camden arrived in the same dark field jacket, gray sweater, black jeans, and polished winter boots. He had not worn his uniform. He had not brought a toy, a new collar, or a bag of treats chosen in panic from the pet store aisle. He wanted to know what Lark needed before filling the house with objects that might mean nothing to her. Inside Pine Hollow, the lobby was busier than before. A young family waited near the door with a cat carrier. A volunteer carried towels from the laundry hall. Someone laughed behind the reception desk, then hushed when a phone rang. Lark stood beside Natalie at the counter on a loose leash. She looked smaller in the lobby than she had in the yard, not weak, just contained. Her black and cold brown coat caught the light from the window. Her brass tag hung still against her collar. When Camden entered, she turned her head toward him, measured him as she had before, and took one step in his direction. It was not a greeting anyone else would have noticed. Camden noticed. "Hi," he said. Lark sniffed his boot, then stood beside his left leg without pressing against him. Her ears moved constantly, dividing the room into sounds. Carrier door, printer, distant barking, a cart somewhere behind the staff hallway. Natalie placed the adoption folder on the counter. "I put the first week routine in here. Feeding times, decompression notes, stress signals, after hours number." Camden opened the folder. He read the first page, then the second. Natalie did not rush him. "Keep tonight small," she said. "One main room. No visitors unless necessary. Let her find the water bowl herself after you show it once. Don't crowd her bed. If she chooses a corner, let it be hers for a while. Food? She may eat less for a day or two. That can be normal. Call if she refuses water, vomits, pants constantly, or can't settle at all." Camden nodded. "And don't wash anything she comes with unless it's unsafe," Natalie added. "Smell is information. Sometimes it's comfort. Sometimes it's history. We don't always know which one on the first day." The sentence stayed with him longer than the others. "Smell is information." He signed where Natalie pointed. The pen moved smoothly over the paper. His name looked official even though his chest felt uncertain. When the last line was complete, Natalie clipped a small plastic bag of Lark's current food to the folder and handed Camden the leash. The transfer was ordinary. A clasp, a loop of nylon, the light shift of responsibility from one hand to another. Lark allowed the leash to change hands. She did not pull toward Natalie. She did not lean into Camden either. Her attention had turned again toward the rear hallway. Camden followed her gaze. The same staff-only door stood beyond the lobby, half obscured by a rolling laundry cart. A woman in scrubs passed through it carrying a metal bowl, and the door swung shut behind her with a soft pneumatic sigh. Lark's ears lifted. Natalie noticed. "She's been doing better today," she said, though her voice had lost a little certainty. "Calm morning. Ate breakfast. Walked the side yard." Camden looked down. Lark's body had not stiffened exactly. It had gathered. The family with the cat carrier stood. The child in the red hat from 2 days before, or one just like him, dropped a mitten on the floor. His mother bent to pick it up. The automatic glass doors opened, letting in a cold blade of air and the bright smell of snow, exhaust, and wet pavement. "This way," Camden said softly. He took one step toward the doors. Lark did not follow. At first he thought she had paused to orient herself. New dogs did that. Thresholds mattered. Bright light, moving doors, strange pavement, a vehicle waiting beyond the glass. Any one of those could make an uncertain animal stop. Camden turned sideways to give her space. Lark stood with all 4 paws planted on the tile. The leash between them went gently taut, not strained, not panicked, just stopped. Natalie came around the counter with a treat in her hand. "Lark." The shepherd's ears flicked toward her voice. Her eyes did not leave the rear hallway. The glass doors opened again as the family stepped outside. The cat carrier bumped lightly against the father's knee. A car engine started in the lot. The child laughed. Wind moved through the lobby and lifted a loose corner of paper on the reception desk. Lark did not flinch. Camden felt the old handler in him rise by instinct. Give clear direction. Keep the energy calm. Move forward with confidence. Let the dog borrow certainty from the person holding the leash. He could have done it. Instead, he looked at her paws. They were not trembling. Her tail was low, but not tucked. Her breathing had deepened, not broken. This was not the shape of fear. Camden had seen fear in dogs. Frantic eyes, a body trying to become smaller, frantic, pulling toward any exit except the one offered. Lark's body said something different. It said no, not to him, not to outside, to leaving. Camden lowered himself to the floor beside her. The tile was cold through his jeans. He laid the leash down until a loose loop rested between them. The movement made Natalie still. "All right," he said quietly to Lark. "You've got time." Around them, the lobby continued its ordinary work. A phone rang. A printer fed out a receipt. Somewhere in the kennel wing, a dog barked 3 times and stopped. Lark stood in the middle of it all, gaze fixed behind them, as if the open door in front of her had asked the wrong question. Natalie crouched several feet away. "She walked through the lobby for her evaluation," she said. "She came in from the side yard without trouble." "Then the lobby isn't the problem." "No." Camden rubbed one thumb slowly along the edge of the leash. He did not touch Lark. He did not coax her with the cheerful voice people used when they needed an animal to make them feel less helpless. He simply waited. After nearly a minute, Lark shifted her weight. Natalie lifted the treat slightly, expecting the movement to come forward. Lark turned and walked away from the glass doors. Camden rose with her, keeping the leash slack. She did not go back to the kennel row. That was the first thing Natalie noticed aloud. "She's not returning to her kennel," she said. Lark moved past the public corridor, past the room where Camden had first filled out his forms, past a volunteer carrying a stack of folded towels. Her steps were controlled, direct. The sounds of barking faded behind them and changed into the deeper hum of the staff side of the building. Natalie reached the staff access door ahead of them and hesitated. Her hand rested on the keypad. "Camden, this area isn't public, I know." Lark stood beside him, eyes on the door. Natalie looked from the dog to Camden, then through the narrow window set into the door. A laundry cart sat on the other side. No medical staff. No open treatment room. No obvious hazard. "I can let us into laundry," she said. "Not medical, not without clearance. That's your call." "I'm making it because of her behavior," Natalie said, more to herself than to him. "Not because you're a police officer." Good. She entered the code. The staff hallway smelled different. Warmer, sharper, crowded with detergent, canned food, bleach, and damp cloth. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Lark stepped through and immediately lowered her nose. She passed a shelf of clean bowls, past a mop bucket, past a closed office door where a radio played softly. At the laundry room, she stopped. The room was narrow, lined with machines and plastic bins. Towels waited in piles. Blankets were sorted by color and condition: clean, repair, discard, intake. A dryer thumped heavily in one corner. Lark went to the intake bin, not the clean blankets, not the fresh towels, the intake bin. She pushed her muzzle into the loose pile and began searching with a concentration so complete that neither Camden nor Natalie spoke. Cloth shifted. A yellow towel fell to the floor. A faded red fleece slid down after it. Then Lark gripped a corner of gray-blue wool between her front teeth and pulled. The blanket came free slowly, heavier than it looked. Its edges were worn thin. One corner had been mended with darker thread. Pale hairs clung to the weave, some white, some black, some so fine they seemed stitched into the fabric by time rather than use. The moment it touched the floor, Lark lowered herself over it. Not beside it, over it. Her chest covered the mended corner. One paw pinned the fold. She pressed her nose deep into the wool and inhaled once, twice, then again, each breath long enough to make Camden feel he was hearing thirst. Natalie knelt but did not reach for the blanket. "Oh, girl," she said under her breath. Camden stood in the laundry room doorway with the leash hanging loose in his hand. He had expected a training problem, a threshold issue, maybe the normal grief of a shelter dog leaving the last familiar place it knew. But this was not a dog clinging to shelter scent. This was a dog guarding evidence only the heart could read. Natalie rose and checked the tag sewn into the blanket's edge. The ink had blurred from too many washes. She could make out part of an intake number, not enough to trust. "This may have been in her first kennel," she said, "or intake. Or it could have come in with another animal from the same day." Camden looked at Lark's body curved over the blanket. "Can she take it?" Natalie did not answer quickly. That made him respect her more. "If it's not contaminated, yes. I'll bag it in a clean liner but won't wash it. I want to note this in her file first." She left the room and returned with a clear plastic sleeve, a marker, and her clipboard. Lark watched every movement. When Natalie gently touched the edge of the blanket, the shepherd's head lifted, no growl, no snap, just a look so quiet and firm that Natalie stopped. "I'm not taking it," Natalie told her. Camden crouched then, not close enough to crowd. "Lark," he said. Her eyes shifted to him. "We can bring it." The words were absurd in one way. A dog could not understand the whole promise in them. But Camden had never believed dogs needed every word to understand the shape of intention. Lark held his gaze for a moment, then lowered her head back to the blanket. Together, Camden and Natalie worked the plastic liner under most of the wool without covering the exposed corner. Natalie wrote a note on the sleeve and then in the file. "Strong attachment to gray-blue wool blanket from intake laundry. Do not wash. Monitor for object guarding, grief behavior, possible bonded history." Possible bonded history. The phrase felt clinical and insufficient. Back in the lobby, Lark walked beside Camden with the blanket bundled carefully under his free arm. At the glass doors, she stopped again. This time, her head turned once toward the staff hallway, only once. Then Camden opened the door. Cold air entered first. Sunlight spread over the tile. Outside, snowbanks shone along the lot, and his truck waited at the far corner, dark against the white field beyond it. Lark stepped through. No one cheered. Natalie did not turn the moment into a victory. Camden was grateful for that. He led Lark across the lot slowly, letting her pause to smell the wind, the tires, the salt underfoot, the distant road. At the truck, he opened the rear door and spread the gray-blue blanket across the seat. Lark placed her front paws on the running board, hesitated, then climbed in and curled over the mended corner. Her body formed a tight half-circle around it. Natalie stood beside Camden in the pale afternoon light. "Keep tonight small," she said again, though more softly this time. "Call me if she can't settle." Camden looked at Lark through the open door. The shepherd's eyes were half closed, but her nose stayed pressed into the blanket. "I thought the hard part would be getting her to trust my house," he said. Natalie folded her arms against the cold. "Sometimes the hard part is finding out what a dog thinks home means." Camden closed the truck door with care. As he walked around to the driver's side, he glanced once toward the shelter's rear hallway windows. Nothing moved behind them. No face appeared. No answer offered itself. He started the truck and pulled out of the lot with Lark quiet behind him. The blanket had gotten her through the door. Camden did not yet understand that it had also kept something else from being left completely behind. Camden had prepared the house for a dog. He had not prepared it for waiting. By the time he turned off the county road and drove beneath the dark pines toward his place, the afternoon had begun to lose its blue brightness. Snow lay clean across the yard, piled low against the fence rails and tucked in the corners of the porch steps. Beyond the house, the frozen lake showed between the trees as a flat gray shine, almost the same color as the winter sky. Lark did not make a sound in the back seat. Every few minutes, Camden looked in the rearview mirror. She lay curled over the gray-blue blanket, her body arranged around the mended corner as if the fabric might disappear if she relaxed too much. Her eyes were open. Her nose stayed pressed into the wool. The shelter had vanished behind them, but whatever the blanket carried had come with her. Camden parked beside the mudroom door and left the engine running for a moment. "This is it," he said, though the words sounded strange in the truck. A house did not become home because a man announced it. He opened the rear door and waited. Lark lifted her head, studied the driveway, the porch, the tree line, the road behind them. Camden did not reach in. He had seen enough uncertain dogs forced through good intentions. After a minute, she rose, stepped down from the truck, and paused with all four paws in the snow. The cold wind moved through her coat. Her ears turned toward the road first, then the trees, then the house. Camden carried the blanket under one arm and led her toward the door on a loose leash. Inside, the mudroom smelled of salt, wool, old leather, and the faint pine scent of firewood stacked against the wall. Camden had taken Atlas's old leash off the hook before leaving for the shelter, then put it back, then taken it down again. In the end, the hook was empty. The old leash lay in a drawer now, wrapped in a towel, not hidden exactly, but no longer hanging where another dog might pass beneath it. He opened the inner door to the living room. The space was simple and neat. A firm dog bed sat near the wall, not in the center of the room. A water bowl rested on a black rubber mat near the kitchen entrance. Two runners crossed the wood floor where Natalie had suggested them. The hallway doors were shut. The blinds were half open, so the room held light without too much movement from outside. Camden placed the gray-blue blanket beside the new dog bed. Lark entered slowly. She did not rush toward the bed or the water. She made one careful pass along the front door, then the window, then the kitchen threshold. At the back door, she stopped longer. Her nose lowered to the seam where cold air slipped in beneath the weather stripping. She listened, then turned and checked the path back to the blanket. Only after she had mapped the room in that way did she approach the water bowl. She sniffed it, touched the surface once with her tongue, and stepped away. Camden removed the leash but left her collar on. "There's no test," he said. Lark looked at him briefly. He wondered if people had said things like that before while meaning the opposite. He made her food at 5, exactly as Natalie had written it. A measured portion, the same brand she had eaten at Pine Hollow, softened slightly with warm water. He set the bowl down and stepped back. Lark approached, ate 3 pieces, and lifted her head. A truck passed on the road outside, not close, not loud, just the low grinding sound of tires over packed snow. Lark turned toward the window and stood there until the sound faded down the hill. Then she went to the blanket and lay down with one shoulder pressed against it. Camden wrote in his notebook. 5:07 p.m. ate 3 pieces. Drank small amount. Oriented toward road noise. Returned to blanket. He did not write what he felt, that the room seemed to have gained a heartbeat without becoming less lonely, that he was relieved she had eaten anything at all, that he had already begun measuring the distance between hope and disappointment in pieces of kibble. The evening settled quietly. Camden warmed soup and ate at the kitchen counter because the table felt too formal for one man and one dog who had not yet agreed on what they were to each other. Lark remained in the living room. From time to time, he heard her shift on the blanket. Once, he glanced around the corner and found her watching him, not with trust exactly, but with the careful attention of an animal deciding where every human belonged. Before bed, he opened the back door and stepped aside. Lark followed him to the threshold. Outside, the yard glowed faintly beneath the porch light. Snow glittered along the path he had cleared to the fence. She lowered her nose to the first step, then to the second. She walked a short circle near the porch, relieved herself, and returned almost immediately, not toward the yard, toward the blanket visible through the open door. Camden locked the house, turned down the lamp, and left the living room dim rather than dark. In his bedroom, he lay awake longer than he wanted to admit. The house had changed its listening. Every small sound now seemed to belong to Lark. A sigh, a paw against wood, the faint tap of her tag against the bowl when she checked the water again. At 1:48 in the morning, Camden woke before he knew why. The room was cold along the edges. The furnace had not yet kicked on. For a second he lay still, waiting for the sound that had pulled him out of sleep. Then came the soft click of claws. He got up and stood in the hallway. Lark was at the front window. She stood motionless, a dark shape against the gray square of glass. Her ears pointed toward the road. Outside, the world was empty except for moonlit snow and the distant scrape of a plow truck somewhere beyond the trees. She did not bark. She did not pace. She simply listened with such concentration that Camden felt like an intruder in a vigil he had not earned the right to interrupt. The plow truck passed far below the house, its amber light flashing once between the trunks. Lark watched until the sound disappeared. Then she returned to the blanket, lowered herself onto it, and pressed her muzzle into the mended corner. A small sound came from her throat. Camden almost missed it. It was not a whine for attention. It was not pain in the ordinary sense. It was quieter than that, held low inside her chest, as if she had remembered something and found no place to put it. Camden stayed in the hallway with one hand against the doorframe. Atlas had made sounds near the end, too. Different ones. Sleep sounds, discomfort sounds. The short breath he gave when trying to stand before his back legs were ready. Camden had learned them all and hated how useful the knowledge became. Hearing Lark now, he felt that old part of himself open like a bruise pressed by accident. He did not go to her. Not yet. He let her have the sound without making it about him. The next morning, Lark ate 4 pieces of dry food and drank properly at 7:12. Camden wrote it down. She went outside for less than 3 minutes and came back to the blanket. When he moved too close to the old mudroom drawer, her head lifted. When he opened the refrigerator, she did not care. When a delivery van slowed near the mailbox, she rose before the tires reached the drive. All day, Camden resisted the urge to solve her. That, he discovered, was harder than caring for her. Caring gave him tasks: fresh water, quiet rooms, a route to the yard, food at the right time, a call to Natalie if the wrong signs appeared. Solving would have let him feel in control. Lark offered him no such mercy. By the second afternoon, the sunlight had turned thin and silver. Camden rolled a tennis ball gently across the living room rug, more as an invitation than a game. Lark watched it bump against the leg of the coffee table. She looked at Camden, then at the ball, then away. "Fair," he said. "Not your sport." He tried soft food warmed with a little water. She ate 3 bites, then stopped. He took the bowl away after 20 minutes as Natalie had instructed, and later found 6 pieces of kibble placed along the edge of the gray-blue blanket. Camden crouched in front of them. They had not fallen there. They had been carried. 1 piece near the mended corner, 2 along the fold, 3 scattered close enough to suggest intention without order. He sat back on his heels and looked at Lark. She lay a few feet away, head lifted, eyes steady. Not guilty, not confused, waiting. The discomfort in Camden's chest sharpened into something clearer. He had seen dogs carry food to pups. He had seen dogs guard bowls, bury biscuits, hide treats in couch cushions. But this did not look like hiding. It looked like saving a share. For whom he did not know. That evening, Evelyn Marsh came by after her shift with a paper bag of groceries Camden had not asked for, and a wool scarf wrapped twice around her neck. Snow dusted the shoulders of her charcoal coat. She stepped inside, took one look at the living room, and softened without saying so. "Smells like you opened a window in your life," she said. "It smells like wet wool and dog food." That too. Evelyn did not approach Lark directly. She set the groceries on the kitchen counter and waited near the doorway. Lark rose from the blanket and walked to her. She sniffed Evelyn's boots first, then the hem of her coat, then one sleeve where the scent of the dispatch room seemed to cling. Coffee, paper, old carpet, winter air, and other people's urgency. "Hello, sweetheart," Evelyn said, low and calm. Lark did not wag. She did not retreat. After smelling the coat, she turned at once toward the front door. Evelyn noticed. Camden did too. "She does that whenever something from outside comes in," he said. Evelyn looked at the blanket, then at the kibble near its edge. "You think she wants to go back?" "I don't know what she wants." "That's not true." Evelyn took off her gloves slowly. "You know enough to be afraid of the answer." Camden did not respond. Evelyn had earned the right to say certain things by never saying them in front of other people. She moved to the living room chair and sat sideways, keeping her body loose. Lark watched her from beside the door, ears shifting between Evelyn and the road. For a while no one spoke. Then Evelyn said, "When my beagle went blind, people kept telling me he was confused because he stood in the hallway at night. But he wasn't confused. He was listening for my husband's chair." Camden looked at her. "After Frank died," she continued, "that dog still expected the old recliner to creak around 10 every night, same time. If I moved the chair, he got worse. If I left it there, he could rest near the sound he remembered, even when the sound didn't come anymore." Lark lowered her head slightly, still facing the door. Evelyn's voice dropped. "She isn't asking where the new house is, Camden. She's asking who stayed behind in the old one." The words entered the room and seemed to alter its temperature. Camden looked at the gray-blue blanket. For 2 days, he had treated it as comfort, a familiar smell, a bridge from shelter to house, but a bridge connected 2 sides. He had been so focused on getting Lark across that he had not asked what remained on the other bank. After Evelyn left, Camden opened Natalie's folder again. He reread the stress signals, the decompression instructions, the after-hours number. He did not call immediately. Some part of him still wanted one more night, one more observation, one more piece of evidence, before admitting that Lark's first days in his house had not been about settling in. At 5:18, a sedan slowed outside. Lark rose before the engine came level with the driveway. She went to the front window and stood there until the car moved on. At 7:00 she ate 2 bites, then carried 1 piece of food to the blanket. At 9:30, Camden found her standing at the back door, not asking to go out, only listening. At 1:41 in the morning, she woke again and returned to the window. Camden wrote each time down. By morning, the page looked less like a new dog adjustment log and more like a pattern he had been refusing to name. He called Natalie after his first cup of coffee. She answered with shelter noise behind her. "How's she doing?" Camden looked across the living room. Lark had her chin resting on the blanket. 3 pieces of kibble remained along the fold. "She's quiet," he said. Too quiet. Natalie did not interrupt. He gave her the details in order: food, water, night waking, vehicles, the door, the blanket, the kibble placed along its edge, the sound she made when her face was buried in the wool. He did not dramatize. He did not guess beyond what he had seen. Reporting facts had saved him from panic in worse rooms than this one. When he finished, Natalie was silent for a moment. "I'd like to see her back here for a few hours," she said. Camden's hand tightened around the phone. "She's not being returned." "I know," Natalie said. "I didn't say returned. I said back here. There's a difference." Lark's ears lifted at the sound of Natalie's voice through the speaker. Camden saw it. So did something inside him that still wanted to pretend this was about adjustment. Natalie continued gently. "We can observe what she does in the building now that she's had time away from it. If the blanket is only comfort, we'll learn that. If it's connected to something else, she may show us." Camden looked at the adoption folder on the table. The papers were signed. Lark was not property in his mind, but the document mattered suddenly in a way he had not expected. It was not proof that she belonged to him. It was proof that taking her back through those doors did not mean abandoning her there. He folded the papers and slid them into the inside pocket of his jacket. Then he clipped the leash to Lark's collar. She stood before he spoke, already facing the door. Lark was on her feet before Camden turned off the road. The truck had not yet reached Pine Hollow's parking lot, but the shepherd had already risen from the back seat, her paws braced carefully on the floor mat, her nose pressed close to the narrow seam of the window. The gray-blue blanket lay beneath her, twisted where she had pushed herself up from it. She did not bark. She did not claw at the glass. Her breathing only changed. Faster, deeper, pulled from somewhere low in her chest. Camden slowed at the entrance. Snow had been cleared from the shelter lot since his last visit, leaving ridges of dirty white along the edges. A delivery van sat near the side door. 2 volunteers crossed the walkway carrying bags of food between them. The building looked ordinary in the winter sun. Almost gentle, the kind of place people wanted to believe always knew what kindness required. Lark knew something else. Camden parked but did not open the door right away. He looked at her in the mirror, watching the way her ears moved toward the shelter's rear half. Not the lobby, not the kennels, not the front entrance where she had first refused to leave. "We're going in," he said. Lark's eyes met his in the glass. The adoption papers were still in the inside pocket of Camden's jacket. He had checked twice before leaving the house. The folded pages pressed against his chest now with each breath. He had not brought them because anyone had questioned him. He had brought them because the act of returning to the shelter needed a boundary around it. Lark was not being surrendered. She was not being undone. She was being heard. Natalie met them at the front doors before Camden could reach the handle. Her forest green shelter jacket was zipped to her chin, and her hair had been pulled into a tighter knot than usual, as though she had dressed for work that might become difficult. "Let her lead as much as safely possible," Natalie said. Camden nodded. "No pressure." He opened the rear door. Lark stepped down into the snow and went forward at once. Inside the lobby, the usual shelter sounds rose around them. Phones, barking, a dryer thumping somewhere deeper in the building, but Lark did not scatter her attention the way she had on adoption day. She passed the reception desk without stopping. She passed the row of framed adoption photos, the donation bin, the small rubber mat near the entrance where other dogs had paused to shake snow from their paws. A volunteer at the counter started to smile. Then she saw Lark's face and stepped aside. Camden kept the leash loose enough that it bowed between his hand and Lark's collar. He was aware of his own posture, aware of how easily a police officer in a private building could fill a space the wrong way. He stayed half a step behind Natalie. He let the shelter remain hers. Lark reached the kennel corridor. Dogs recognized movement and rose along the row. A terrier barked sharply. A heavy hound gave one mournful bay. Metal tags chimed against gates. Lark did not look at them. She passed her own former kennel as if it belonged to a life she had already left. That was the moment Camden felt the shape of the problem change. Whatever had kept her awake at his house was not a longing for the shelter. It was not confusion. It was not the familiar distress of a dog carried from one place to another before it had learned the new map. Lark knew exactly where she was going. At the staff hallway door, Natalie held up a hand. "Wait here." Lark stopped because Camden stopped, but every line of her body leaned forward. Her nose worked at the air coming from beneath the door. Camden could see the muscles along her shoulders tighten, then release, then tighten again. Natalie stepped through the staff door alone. Camden heard low voices beyond it. A phone was lifted. A question was asked twice. He caught only fragments. Behavior concern, adopted dog, previous intake, medical clearance. The waiting stretched longer than Lark wanted. She shifted one paw, then another, but did not pull. Camden lowered himself beside her, not all the way to the floor this time, just into a crouch. "I know," he said. He did not know. Not yet. But he knew the feeling of a closed door becoming the center of a life. Natalie returned with a woman in navy scrubs and a gray fleece vest. She was in her early 50s, slim, with a short bob of salt and pepper hair and wire-framed glasses that had slid halfway down her nose. A stethoscope with a dark blue tube hung around her neck. She carried herself with the practical calm of someone who had been bitten, cried on, doubted, and called too late more times than she cared to count. "This is Dr. Phoebe Larkin," Natalie said, "shelter veterinarian." Phoebe looked first at Lark, then at Camden, then at the leash in his hand. "You're the adopter?" "Yes." "Not here in an official police capacity?" "No." "Good." She said it without apology. "Then we're all clearer about what we're doing." Camden respected her immediately. A heavier man came behind Phoebe from the office side of the hall. He wore a dark gray manager's jacket over a navy button-up shirt. His hair was blonde, going thin at the temples, his face square and tired, his ID badge clipped slightly crooked near the zipper. Camden recognized the strain in his eyes, a man used to solving problems by moving them into the next hour. "Gavin Kells," he said. "Shelter manager." His handshake was brief. His gaze moved to Lark and did not settle. Phoebe folded her arms. "We have an elderly dog in medical. No public access. If I open that door, it's because Natalie has documented a behavior concern and because I'm supervising. If either dog shows distress, we stop." "Understood," Camden said. Lark gave a low sound. Not a growl, not a whine, a breath with an edge in it. Gavin looked toward the medical wing door. Natalie noticed. So did Camden. Phoebe took a key from a retractable clip on her waistband, but she did not use it immediately. "Before we go in, leash stays loose. Nobody rushes. Nobody interprets faster than the dogs can show us." The key entered the lock. Camden felt, with sudden clarity, that if this door opened, Lark might not belong to the simple story he had been telling himself. Not a lonely dog finding a quiet house. Not a wounded man learning to try again. Something on the other side might ask more of him than companionship. It might ask whether he had brought her home too soon, whether he had mistaken custody for care, whether saving one heart while leaving another behind counted as rescue at all. Phoebe opened the door. The medical wing smelled sharper than the rest of the shelter. Antiseptic, warmed blankets, prescription food, clean metal. The room beyond was small and bright, with cabinets along one wall and 2 low recovery mats on the floor. A heater hummed near the window. On the nearest mat lay an old black Labrador. At first, Camden saw only age, the broad head, the silver muzzle, the cloudy eyes that did not fix on the door but lifted toward the change in air, the heavy body, once powerful, now softened and thinned by illness. One rear leg lay slightly out from under him, as if he had meant to tuck it beneath his body and failed. Phoebe's voice softened. "Bishop." The Labrador's ears shifted toward her, then past her, toward Lark. Lark stepped into the room so quickly Camden almost tightened the leash. He stopped himself in time. She moved 3 fast paces, then slowed as if remembering the body she approached could not meet speed with speed. Bishop tried to rise, his front paws pushed against the mat, his chest lifted, his hindquarters trembled, searching for strength that did not arrive evenly. One back paw slid over the edge of the padding and struck the tile. Lark reached him before anyone else moved. She did not jump on him. She did not crowd his face. She placed her shoulder against his chest, firm and angled, giving him a wall of living balance. Bishop leaned into her at once. His cloudy eyes remained unfocused, but his nose traveled along her neck, her ear, the side of her face. He breathed her in with a desperate slowness, as though each breath returned a piece of the world to its proper place. Lark stood still until Bishop's shaking eased, then she lowered her head and checked him. His collar first, the side of his neck, one ear, the line of his shoulder, both hind legs. She sniffed the paw that had slipped, then looked once toward Phoebe, not asking permission exactly, but marking what needed attention. Phoebe's mouth tightened. "She's done that before," Natalie whispered. No one answered. Bishop shifted his weight, and Lark lowered herself beside him, curving her body along his ribs. The old Labrador sank back onto the mat. His muzzle came to rest across Lark's front paw. The room changed then. The tension went out of him in visible degrees. Jaw, neck, shoulders, breath. Lark closed her eyes. Camden stood at the threshold, still holding the leash, though it no longer seemed to mean anything. For 3 nights, Lark had guarded windows, doors, engine sounds, and a blanket. For 3 nights she had slept as if some part of her remained on duty. Now, on a medical room floor beneath fluorescent lights, beside an old dog whose legs could barely hold him, she gave herself to sleep almost at once. The leash slackened all the way to the tile. Camden did not trust himself to speak. Natalie knelt slowly, her clipboard forgotten against her side. "His name is Bishop?" Phoebe nodded. 12-year-old male Labrador, severe dehydration on arrival, arthritis, hind-end weakness, vision mostly gone. "We're still monitoring kidney values." Gavin remained near the cabinets. Camden looked at him. "They know each other," Camden said. It was not a question. Gavin rubbed one hand over the back of his neck. "They came in the same evening." Natalie turned. The sentence landed harder than it should have. Phoebe's eyes narrowed slightly. "Gavin," he exhaled, "different locations on the property. Different animal control slips. Bishop came through the service side because he needed medical immediately. Lark came through behavioral intake because she was blocking the officers from moving him." Natalie stood. "That wasn't in the adoption file." "No," Gavin said. "Why not?" The old Labrador stirred at the change in her voice. Lark opened one eye. Camden lifted his hand slightly, not to command anyone, only to quiet the room. Natalie saw the movement and lowered her tone. Gavin looked toward the dogs instead of the people. "We were full. Medical was full. Kennels were doubled. Lark was young, healthy, adoptable. Bishop needed hospice or a medical foster we didn't have. So you separated the story," Natalie said. "I separated the files." "That's the same thing to them." Gavin flinched, but he did not defend himself quickly. That mattered. Camden had spent much of his adult life listening to lies, excuses, fear, and guilt. This was not a man enjoying cruelty. This was a man looking at the cost of a decision he had made under pressure, and finding that pressure did not erase the harm. "I thought," Gavin said slowly, "if her file made her part of a bonded pair with a 12-year-old medical dog, adopters would pass her by every day, maybe for months, maybe until she started declining too." "And Bishop?" Phoebe asked. Gavin's face tightened. "I thought we'd find a foster, but you didn't." "No." The heater hummed. Somewhere outside the room, a kennel door closed with a metallic click. Bishop lifted his head at the sound, uncertain. Lark rose without fully standing, pressed her shoulder more firmly along his chest, and Bishop settled again. Camden watched the motion, small, trained by repetition, not obedience, care. "What else was left out?" Camden asked. Gavin looked at him then, perhaps remembering Camden was a police sergeant after all, even without the uniform. Camden kept his voice even. He did not want authority to do the work that honesty should do. Natalie answered by moving to the computer station near the wall. "Let's pull the intake records." Phoebe stayed near the dogs. Camden remained where he was, unwilling to step deeper into the room while Lark slept against Bishop's side. The space felt like theirs before it belonged to anyone else. Natalie logged in. Gavin gave her the date. She searched animal control intake by location, then widened the search to the surrounding county road. 2 records appeared. Bishop's intake time, 6:42 p.m. Lark's intake time, 7:08 p.m., same date. The addresses were not identical. One listed the rear service drive of an old rural property outside White Harbor. The other listed the front entrance. "Same property?" Camden asked. Gavin nodded. Natalie opened the notes attached to Bishop's file, found near porch, weakness in hind limbs, dehydrated, possible missed medication, immediate veterinary evaluation recommended. She opened Lark's, adult female German Shepherd, no chip, high stress during separation, attempted to remain near medical transport. Natalie stopped reading. Her face had gone still. That's all? Gavin said nothing. Phoebe's voice was quiet. There should have been a bonded behavior flag. There should have been more staff that night, Gavin said, then shook his head as if angry at himself for saying it. No, that's not an answer. No, Natalie said, it's context, not an answer. Camden looked again at the blanket that Natalie had brought in from his truck and set near the door. Lark had not gone to it. She no longer needed to. The blanket had not the thing she loved. It had been the nearest surviving piece of the one she refused to leave. Bishop shifted. His front paw slid against the mat. Lark woke immediately. She did not startle. She simply rose, checked his position, and placed herself so his shoulder rested against her again. Bishop breathed out and lowered his muzzle across her leg. Gavin watched them with a face stripped of shelter language, adoptability, capacity, intake, outcome. Those words had uses. Camden knew that. Systems needed words to function. But there were moments when a word like outcome became too small to hold what had happened. I wasn't trying to hurt her, Gavin said. Camden believed him. That was the difficult part. If you had told me. Camden said, I might have hesitated. Gavin looked down. Camden continued, you were right about that. Natalie turned from the computer. But I would have been hesitating over the truth, Camden said. Not over something she spent 3 days trying to explain alone. No one answered. Phoebe crouched beside Bishop, letting him smell the back of her hand before she checked the slipped paw. Lark watched closely but did not interfere. The trust did not extend far, but it extended enough. Natalie printed both intake records. The machine clicked and fed out the pages one at a time. She placed them on the counter, then wrote across the top of Lark's file in firm black ink, bonded history suspected. Do not separate without behavioral review. Her pen paused. Then she added Bishop's intake number beside it. Gavin saw her do it and did not stop her. Camden finally stepped into the room. He moved slowly, stopping a few feet from the mat. Lark opened her eyes. Bishop's nose lifted, searching for the new position of the man in the room. Camden lowered himself to one knee. Hey, Bishop, he said. The old Labrador turned his head toward Camden's voice, but could not find him with his eyes. Lark remained still, allowing the introduction to happen across her body. Camden did not reach out. Not yet. He looked at Lark instead. You were telling the truth. Her amber-brown eyes held his for a second, then drifted closed again. Outside the medical wing, the shelter went on working. Phones rang, doors opened. Dogs barked for food, for fear, for strangers, for home. Inside the room, an old Labrador slept because a shepherd had returned to his side, and a police sergeant understood that the adoption he had signed was no longer a simple beginning. It was a correction. And corrections, Camden knew, usually cost more than beginnings. Dr. Phoebe Larkin did not let emotion rush the room. That was the first thing Camden noticed after the intake records were printed and clipped to Lark's file. Bishop still lay with his muzzle across Lark's paw, breathing easier than he had when they opened the medical wing door. Lark's eyes were half closed, but she was not sleeping the careless sleep of a dog with nothing left to guard. Every time Bishop's hind legs twitched, her ear moved. Phoebe crouched near the old Labrador and waited for him to smell her hand before she touched his shoulder. Bishop lifted his nose, found the familiar scent of the veterinarian, and settled again. He can have good days, Phoebe said, but good doesn't mean simple. Camden stood near the counter, the printed records in one hand. Gavin Kells had stepped out to answer a call from the front desk, leaving the medical room quieter, though not easier. Natalie remained beside the computer, her clipboard held against her chest, as if the paper could keep her from reaching too quickly for blame. Phoebe checked Bishop's rear paw, then his hips. The old dog endured the examination with the patient dignity of an animal who had already learned that pain was sometimes the price of standing. Arthritis in both hips, Phoebe continued. Muscle loss behind, vision nearly gone. Kidney values aren't where I want them. We're managing dehydration and he needs a diet that won't make the kidneys work harder than necessary. How often would he need medication? Camden asked. Morning and evening, pain control with food, kidney support, follow-up blood work, hydration monitoring. Someone has to notice if he stops drinking, if he can't rise, if his breathing changes, if he gets disoriented and traps himself somewhere. As she spoke, Lark shifted closer to Bishop's ribs. Phoebe saw it. That, she said quietly, is part of his care too, whether anyone meant to write it down or not. Camden looked at Lark's body braced beside the Labrador. Can the shelter place him? We can try. Phoebe removed her gloves and dropped them into the bin. Hospice foster is hard. Senior medical foster is harder. A blind dog with mobility issues is a daily commitment. Add a bonded shepherd who may not settle without him, and most people will say they wish they could. There was no judgment in her tone. That made the truth heavier. Natalie finally spoke. We don't have to decide anything today. Camden knew she meant it kindly, but the word we struck him in a strange place. Shelter staff could review files, Phoebe could prescribe, Gavin could revise procedures. But when the day ended, Lark would either leave Bishop again or she would not. And Camden had signed the paper that made Lark's leaving possible. He looked down at the intake records. Same date, same property, 2 locations, 2 dogs. One story split cleanly enough that a man could miss what a dog had carried in her body for days. I need to know where they came from, he said. Natalie looked at him carefully. As Lark's adopter, you're entitled to behavior-relevant history, but we have to do it correctly. I'm not asking to run an investigation. I know, I don't want doors opening because of my badge. Then they won't. Natalie reached for the phone. Animal control brought them in. We start there. Russell Fenway arrived 40 minutes later in a tan county jacket with salt on the cuffs and cold still clinging to him. He was around 45, broad through the chest in the way of a man who lifted gates, carriers, and frightened animals more often than weights. His skin was warm brown, his hair cut close, his face steady and practical. A folded catchpole rested in the back of his county truck. Though Camden had the sense, Russell preferred patience whenever patience was possible. I remember them, Russell said after Natalie explained. Hard night. They stood in the shelter's side office with a county map spread over the desk. Russell tapped a gloved finger near a narrow road north of town. Old place off Calder Mill Road. Front drive was drifted over. Service track behind the property was half open because of the trees. Bishop was near the porch when we got there, weak, dehydrated. Lark kept putting herself between us and him. Was she aggressive? Camden asked. Russell shook his head. Protective. There's a difference, she warned, but she gave ground when we slowed down. Then every time we moved Bishop, she tried to come with him. Why 2 intake slips? Because Bishop went straight to veterinary transport from the service side. Lark came in through the front with my partner after we got her loaded separately. Russell looked at Natalie, not defensively but with regret. It was snowing sideways. We were short. I wrote enough to get them care, not enough to keep their story together. No one in the room tried to make that smaller. Camden watched Russell's finger remain on the map. Is the property accessible now? It should be. Russell glanced at Camden. But we go as county animal control, not police. No search, no fishing. I can show you exterior conditions and speak with the neighbor who called us. If she has permission or a key, that's her choice. We do this clean, agreed. Natalie took her coat from the hook. Camden looked once through the small office window toward the medical wing. Lark was not visible, but he knew where she was, beside Bishop, keeping the old dog's map intact. The drive to Calder Mill Road took them through the bright, open quiet that comes after a storm has exhausted itself. Pine branches hung low with snow. Stone walls rose and vanished beneath white drifts. The farther they went from White Harbor, the fewer houses appeared, until the road became a narrow ribbon between woods and frozen fields. Russell led in the county truck. Natalie rode with him. Camden followed behind, his own truck moving slowly over the packed snow. He did not bring Lark. Phoebe had advised against it until they knew what they were walking into. Camden had agreed, though leaving her in the medical room had felt like removing a witness from the only case she had been trying to testify in. The old house stood back from the road, half hidden by bare maples. It was not abandoned. That was what struck Camden first. The porch had sagged slightly at one corner, and snow lay thick along the roofline. But the place had the order of a life interrupted, not discarded. A wind chime made from small brass gears hung by the door. Firewood was stacked beneath a tarp. A narrow wooden ramp rested over the back step, its surface scratched by claws and weather. Across the fence, a smaller house released a thin ribbon of smoke from its chimney. An elderly woman opened that door before Russell could knock. She had a green quilted coat pulled over a cream sweater and a gray scarf looped around her neck. Her silver hair was curled close to her head, and her boots were already wet with snow, as if she had been waiting by the window and stepped out the instant help arrived. "Alma Creedon?" Russell called. "That's me." Her eyes moved from Russell to Natalie, then to Camden. She noticed his bearing before she noticed anything official about him. "You found out about the dogs," she said. Natalie's expression softened. "We're trying to understand what happened." Alma looked toward the old house. Theodore would hate that word. Happened. Makes it sound like weather. She crossed the yard with a key ring in one hand. A blue piece of yarn had been tied around one key, frayed from years of use. "Theodore Madsen gave me this after his wife died," she said. "Emergency only. Pipes. Storms. If I smelled gas. We never meant for it to become what it became." She unlocked the back door and stepped aside. Russell entered first, then Natalie, then Camden. They did not spread out. No one opened drawers. No one treated the house like evidence. They stood in the kitchen and let the place speak through what had been left visible. The first thing Camden saw was the floor. Rubber-backed runners crossed the room in purposeful lines. One led from the kitchen to the living room, another led to the back door. A textured mat sat beneath a water bowl placed near the cabinet, not in the middle of the floor, where a blind dog might stumble into it. Chairs had been pushed tight against the walls. The coffee table had foam padding on two corners. A low wooden ramp led from the porch step into the mudroom. Natalie's breath caught softly. "This wasn't improvised," she said. "No," Alma answered. "Theodore measured everything." In the living room, a workbench stood near the window, covered with tiny drawers, clock faces, springs, and half-repaired instruments. A mandolin rested in an open case beside a magnifying lamp. On the wall hung a photograph of a younger Theodore beside a woman with dark hair and a wide smile, Bishop sitting between them with a red ball in his mouth. There was no photograph of Lark on the wall. Alma noticed Camden looking. "She came later," she said. After Miriam passed, the name softened her face. Theodore fixed clocks and old instruments. That was his trade. After his wife died, he stopped taking big jobs, but people still brought him watches, music boxes, little things they couldn't bear to throw away. Bishop was with him through all of it. That dog knew every sound in this house. "And Lark?" Camden asked. Alma led them to the back window. Beyond the yard, a section of fence had been repaired with newer wire. Snow had drifted along the bottom, but Camden could still see where the old posts leaned. "It was 3 winters ago," Alma said. Bishop started barking before dawn. Not his usual bark. Not the one for deer or the mail truck. Theodore said the sound pulled him out of bed like a hand on his shoulder. Bishop ran to that fence, then back to the porch, then to the fence again. Theodore followed. Her voice changed there. He found her caught in collapsed wire. Young, thin, one leg trapped. She'd worn herself bloody trying to get loose. Natalie looked toward the fence. "Theodore cut her free?" she asked. "With wire cutters and half his own coat wrapped around her. He brought her through this door, laid her on that rug, and Bishop wouldn't leave her side." Camden looked at the runner between the back door and the living room. He could almost see it. An old man in a winter coat, a black Labrador barking himself hoarse, a young shepherd too exhausted to understand rescue had arrived. Did they try to find her owner? For weeks, Alma folded her gloved hands around the key ring. Clinic, feed store, church board, county page, no chip, no calls. Theodore started by calling her the girl. Then one day she looked up when he said Lark, and that was that. On the workbench, a small brass clock ticked unevenly. Alma crossed to the back door and lifted one hand to the frame. 3 shallow marks showed in the wood, not damage exactly, more like a rhythm worn into habit. He knocked here every afternoon, she said. 3 taps before he came in from the shed or the woodpile. Bishop couldn't see much by then. Lark would stand beside him right there, shoulder to his chest, pointing him toward the door. She tapped the frame softly, once, twice, a longer third. The sound traveled through the old house and returned from the empty rooms with a tenderness Camden was not prepared for. For a moment, no one moved. The pattern was small enough to belong to any ordinary life, not a command, not a trick, a man telling 2 dogs he was home, a blind dog orienting himself toward love, a shepherd making sure the body beside her faced the right direction. Camden understood suddenly why Lark had stood at his window in the night, listening to trucks pass a road that was not this road. She was not waiting for any vehicle. She was waiting for a rhythm the world had stopped giving her. Alma wiped beneath one eye with the edge of her glove and turned toward the kitchen. Theodore fell in there, she said. Near the counter, the floor was clean now, but the arrangement told enough. A cane leaned in the corner. A small weekly pill organizer sat beside the sink. A calendar on the wall was still turned to the week of the storm. I called him that morning, Alma said. No answer. I came over with the key and found him on the floor. He was conscious, but his speech wasn't right. Ambulance took him to North County, then rehab in Montpelier. Where was Colby? Russell asked. Alma's jaw tightened, not with hatred, but with a disappointment that had tired itself out. His nephew lives 40 minutes south. He came the next day, said he'd handle the dogs until Theodore came home. He filled the bin, set out water, took Bishop's medicine instructions from the fridge. She pointed to a paper still taped beside a cabinet. Morning tablet, evening tablet, soft food, water check twice. At first, Colby did come. Then work got busy. Weather got bad. He said he'd be here tomorrow. Then tomorrow after that. Then the weekend. Camden had heard that word in too many homes. Tomorrow. It was the most dangerous word decent people used when they did not want to admit they were already failing. Alma looked toward the porch. I started bringing food when I saw the bowls empty. I changed water when I could. But Bishop got weaker. If the bowl moved, he couldn't find it. If the mat shifted, he'd stand there lost, poor old thing. Lark did what she could. She brought him back from corners. She barked when he fell. She slept between him and the door when the wind came under it. Natalie had stopped writing. Russell removed his cap and held it in both hands. The day I called you, Alma said to him. Bishop was outside by the porch. His front paws were scraped from trying to drag himself. Lark had her body against him, blocking the wind. She ran to my fence, barked twice, ran back to him, then came again, like she was showing me where to look. Russell's face was quiet. I remember. Colby came later? After we called him, Russell said. He signed temporary surrender, said he couldn't provide daily care. Alma gave a small nod. I don't think he meant for them to suffer, she said. That may be the worst part. If he had been cruel, I could hate him cleanly. But he just kept believing there was one more day. Camden looked around the house one last time. The runners, the ramp, the water mat, the clock parts waiting under dust, the marks on the doorframe where Theodore had tapped his way back into the world of his dogs. No villain had come into this house and destroyed it in one dramatic act. Instead, responsibility had thinned by inches, a fall, a hospital transfer, a nephew too busy, a neighbor unsure how far she was allowed to step in, a shelter at capacity, a manager separating files, each person holding one corner, none of them seeing the whole weight until it had already dropped onto the animals least able to carry it. Outside, the snow brightened under a break in the clouds. Alma locked the door when they left. She kept the key in her palm after turning it, as if she could not yet bear to put it away. Will Theodore know? She asked. Natalie looked to Camden. Camden did not answer as a police officer. He answered as the man who had watched Lark sleep beside Bishop only after finding him again. He should be told carefully, Camden said. And only by someone who can stay long enough for the answer to hurt. Alma nodded. Then she looked toward the repaired fence and said the thing that followed Camden back to his truck. They survived the cold, she said, but they shouldn't have had to survive our delays. Before Camden made any promise to Bishop, he went to see Theodore Madsen. It would have been easier not to. The old house on Calder Mill Road had already told Camden enough to understand the shape of the loss. The runners, the ramp, the water mat, the 3 worn taps on the back door frame. Each one had explained how carefully Theodore had built a world where a blind dog could still move with dignity, but a house could not give permission. A house could not answer the question that now stood between Camden and the next right thing. Theodore could. Montpelier Ridge Rehabilitation Center sat on a hill above the town, its windows catching the white afternoon light. The building was clean and quiet, with salted walkways, automatic doors, and a lobby that smelled faintly of coffee, antiseptic, and winter coats drying near the entrance. Camden did not wear his full uniform. He came in his navy wool coat over a gray shirt, his badge tucked inside rather than displayed. Natalie had advised him to approach Theodore as Lark's adopter, not as an officer. Camden agreed. Some doors opened more gently when authorities stayed outside them. A woman met him near the reception desk. She was in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled into a loose bun and reading glasses hanging from a cord at her neck. Her sweater was soft blue, her clipboard worn at the edges from constant use. She introduced herself as Marcy Ellison, the social worker assigned to Theodore's rehabilitation plan. "He's alert today," Marcy said as they walked down a hallway lined with framed photographs of Vermont lakes in summer. "Speech is clear most of the time. His left side is still weak. He understands more than people assume when they hear the pauses." "I don't want to overwhelm him," Camden said. "That's why I'm here." Marcy glanced at him, not unkindly. "And why the dogs are not." Camden nodded. He had wanted to bring them. Some part of him believed Theodore deserved the comfort immediately. But Phoebe had been firm. Bishop was too weak for an unplanned trip, and Lark's reaction could not be predicted in a medical setting filled with wheelchairs, alarms, unfamiliar scents, and people moving too close. So Camden carried only the truth. Marcy paused outside a therapy room. "He has been told the dogs are safe," she said. "He has not been told everything." Camden looked through the narrow window. Inside, Theodore Madsen sat near a parallel bar with a folded blanket over his knees. He was thinner than Camden expected. Tall once, maybe, but age and injury had drawn him inward. His white hair had been combed back carefully. His right hand rested on the arm of the wheelchair. The left lay slower in his lap, fingers curled as if still learning how to belong to him again. Marcy opened the door. "Theodore," she said gently, "this is Camden Ralston. He's the man caring for Lark right now." Theodore turned his head. His eyes were pale blue and tired, but they sharpened at the name. Not Camden's, Lark's. Camden stepped closer, leaving enough distance that Theodore would not have to look up too sharply. "Mr. Madsen." "Theodore," the old man said. His voice was thin but steady. "No one calls me Mr. unless they're selling me something or giving me bad news." Camden pulled a chair near him but did not sit until Theodore nodded once. For a few seconds, neither man spoke. The therapy room carried the small sounds of recovery, rubber soles on polished floor, a therapist counting quietly across the room, the squeak of a wheelchair brake. Outside the window, snow slid from the branch of a pine and fell without ceremony. Theodore looked at Camden's hands. "You have dogs?" The question caught him off guard. "I had one," Camden said. "A canine atlas." "Had," Theodore repeated softly. "Yes." The old man accepted the word without asking for its wound. Then he asked the only question that mattered to him. "Are they together?" Camden felt Marcy's attention shift toward him. "Yes," he said. "Lark and Bishop are together at Pine Hollow. Bishop is in the medical wing. Lark is with him." Theodore closed his eyes. The breath that left him was not relief alone. It had pain in it too, as if a man could be grateful and broken by the same answer. Good, he whispered. She would not sleep otherwise. Camden leaned forward slightly. You knew that? I knew my girl. Theodore opened his eyes again. Bishop can't see much, not for a long time now. But he knows where she is, her feet, her breathing, the way she stands too close when he's about to miss the rug. His right hand moved against the blanket over his knees, a small, restless motion. And Lark? Theodore's mouth trembled once. He stopped it by pressing his lips together. She watched him like it was a job. No one trained her. Bishop found her first, you know. She decided after that he belonged to her. Camden thought of the old Labrador trying to rise in the medical room, of Lark placing her shoulder exactly where Bishop needed a wall. The house is built around him, Camden said. Theodore looked toward the window. It was built around both of them by the end. Bishop needed the floor to stay still. Lark needed the world to make sense. Same as old men, I suppose. Marcy stood near the wall, quiet enough to let the conversation breathe, close enough to steady it if it began to fall apart. Theodore, she said, Camden has been to your house with animal control and Natalie from the shelter. Alma let them in. At Alma's name, Theodore's face softened with recognition and shame. She should not have had to carry what I left. She tried, Camden said. Theodore's eyes came back to him. Colby said they were fine. Camden did not rush. He signed temporary surrender after animal control came. The old man's hand tightened on the armrest. Were they hurt? Bishop was dehydrated, weak. He missed medication. Lark stayed with him. Theodore looked down at his lap. The room did not stop. Someone laughed softly at the far end. A therapist praised a patient for taking 3 steps. Life continued in the rude way it often did when someone's heart had just been given a new weight. I thought I would be home in a few weeks, Theodore said. I kept telling them that. A few weeks. Bishop knows the house. Lark knows Bishop. I thought if they could just hold on. His voice broke before he finished. Marcy moved a little closer, but Theodore raised his right hand, asking for time rather than rescue. Camden understood that gesture. Pride was not always stubbornness. Sometimes it was the last piece of furniture a person knew how to keep upright inside himself. The doctors are talking about longer rehabilitation, Marcy said softly, and possibly assisted living afterward. Theodore gave a small, bitter smile. That means they talk about it when they think I'm asleep. It means they're trying to plan safely. For me, he said, not for them. Camden looked at the old man and saw the cruel shape of the choice. Theodore loved Bishop and Lark enough to want them home, but home had become a place he could not hold open by himself. I haven't made a decision yet, Camden said. Theodore lifted his head. I adopted Lark. I did not know about Bishop. Camden's voice remained steady, though the words cost him more than he expected. If I bring Bishop into my house, it would have to be as hospice foster first. Dr. Larkin would oversee the medical plan. The shelter would keep supporting his medication and follow-up at the beginning. Theodore listened carefully. It would not erase you, Camden said. It would not make your house meaningless. Theodore's eyes filled, but he did not look away. Can you do it? He asked. The question was not accusation. It was worse. It was trust looking for a place to land. Camden thought of Atlas near the end, the rubber mats, the water bowl, the nights when the old dog stared at the floor before trying to stand, embarrassed by a body that had once moved like certainty. He had survived those months by loving the dog in front of him and fearing every morning after. He had promised himself never again, but promises made from pain often mistook walls for wisdom. I don't know, Camden said honestly, but I know what it would require. Theodore nodded once. That's better than saying yes too quickly. When Camden left the rehabilitation center, he sat in his truck for several minutes before starting it. Snow had begun again, light enough to drift rather than fall. He looked at his black wristwatch and remembered the old medication alarms, the way Atlas had learned the sound, and lifted his head before Camden reached the bottle. Morning and evening, good days and bad days, the ordinary work before the final mercy. By the time Camden returned to Pine Hollow, Phoebe had Bishop's medication lined up on the medical counter. Natalie had prepared a home safety checklist. Evelyn arrived 20 minutes later in her charcoal winter coat, carrying a small plastic pill organizer. She said Camden could refuse if he wanted to be foolish. "I'm not signing up for drama," Evelyn told Phoebe. "I'm signing up for water, medicine, and not moving chairs." Phoebe regarded her over the top of her glasses. "That's most of the work." "Good. I'm qualified." There was no ceremony. That helped. Phoebe explained Bishop's medication one line at a time. Pain control with meals, kidney support, hydration checks, watch for refusal to stand, prolonged panting, vomiting, confusion that did not resolve, or pain that medication could no longer soften. She did not make the future prettier for Camden. She made it visible. Natalie inspected Camden's plan: runners, backdoor ramp, water mat, closed rooms, emergency contact. Evelyn confirmed she had a key and would come if Camden was called into a storm shift. Phoebe approved a hospice foster period with review after the first week. Gavin Kells brought the paperwork. He did not meet Camden's eyes immediately. The red folder in his hands had new notes clipped to the top. Lark Rolston, adopted. Bishop, hospice foster. Bonded pair, do not separate without behavioral and veterinary review. "I added the cross-reference," Gavin said. Natalie checked it before Camden signed. Camden appreciated that too. He signed Bishop's hospice foster agreement at the same counter where he had signed Lark's adoption papers. The difference was that this time he knew the shape of what he was accepting. No one had hidden the hard part from him. No dog had to carry the missing piece alone. When they brought Bishop out, the old Labrador stood with Phoebe's support sling beneath his belly and Lark close along his side. He moved slowly, each paw testing the floor. Lark adjusted herself every time his hindquarters drifted. Camden walked ahead, speaking in a low voice so Bishop could follow the sound. "Step forward." "Good." "Mat edge. Door ahead." At the truck, Camden had already unfolded a low ramp. Bishop hesitated when one paw touched the ridged surface. Lark climbed first, then turned near the top and waited. Bishop lifted his nose toward her scent and tried again. It took time. No one rushed him. At home, the house Camden had prepared for one dog became a house being remade for two. He rolled out the extra runners before bringing Bishop inside. A dark strip of textured mat marked the back threshold. The water bowl stayed on a coarse black square near the kitchen. Chairs were pushed tighter against the walls. The coffee table went into the mudroom. A folded towel rested near the door, in case Bishop's paws dragged snow inside and Lark grew anxious about slipping. Camden spoke before touching the old dog. "Hand on your shoulder." Bishop paused at the sound. "One step. Water on your left." Lark walked close enough that her side brushed Bishop's ribs. When he drifted toward the wall, she curved against him and brought him back to the runner. When he reached the mat beneath the water bowl, she stood still until he found the dish. The first evening took all of Camden's attention. Bishop ate slowly. Lark did not begin until Bishop's bowl was empty. Bishop needed help lowering himself onto the thick rug near Camden's chair. Lark circled once, checked the edge of the rug, then lay with her back against his side. Camden sat on the floor instead of the chair. He had expected the pain of remembering Atlas to arrive like a blow. Instead, it came in small recognitions: the weight of a medication bottle in his palm, the sound of old paws sliding before catching, the careful way a dog pretended not to need help until help was given without insult. Near midnight, Bishop stirred. Camden woke in the chair before he fully understood the sound. Lark's head had lifted too, her ears already alert, her body preparing to rise. But Camden was closer. He stood slowly. "I've got him." Lark froze. Camden moved to Bishop's side and spoke before touching him. "Hand on your shoulder. Up easy." Bishop pushed with his front paws. Camden supported him lightly, not lifting more than the old dog needed. Together they reached the water mat. Bishop drank for a long time, paused, then turned his head as if the room had become too wide. "This way," Camden said. "Runner under your feet." He guided Bishop back, step by step, until the old Labrador lowered himself onto the rug with a tired sigh. Lark had watched every movement. Her eyes moved from Bishop to Camden, then back to Bishop. The house held still around them, snow at the windows, furnace low in the walls, the new bowl catching a thin line of moonlight. Finally, Lark lowered her head, not all the way at first. Then, slowly, her muzzle settled onto the rug beside Bishop's shoulder. Camden remained standing until he was sure both dogs were asleep. For the first time since Lark had entered his life, she had allowed someone else to take the watch. The visit was not approved because it was touching. That was what Dr. Phoebe Larkin made clear before anyone put a leash on either dog. Bishop had eaten breakfast. He had taken his morning medication without refusing the soft food wrapped around it. His breathing was steady. His gums looked better than they had the week before, and he had managed the short ramp at Camden's back door twice with only light support. Only then did Phoebe agree. 20 minutes outside, she said over the phone. Maybe less if he tires. No indoor hallways, no crowded lobby. No stairs. If he refuses to continue, you stop. If Lark gets anxious, you stop. This is a visit, not a test. Camden wrote every instruction down, though he could have repeated them from memory. I understand. I know you do, Phoebe said. That is why I'm saying it anyway. So the meeting was arranged for the sheltered courtyard at Montpelier Ridge Rehabilitation Center, where Marcy Ellison could control the space and Theodore Madsen could remain warm beneath the glass overhang. Salt had been spread over the stone path. A nurse moved 2 metal chairs away from the walkway. Marcy checked the gate latch herself, then placed Theodore's wheelchair facing the entrance where the dogs would come through. Light snow fell without urgency. It drifted past the glass roof in soft pieces, bright enough to make the morning look gentle, though the air still carried the hard edge of Vermont winter. Theodore sat with a beige wool blanket over his knees and a navy scarf tucked into the collar of his cardigan. His right hand rested on the chair arm, his left lay over the blanket, fingers loose and slightly curled. The weakness in that hand bothered him. Camden saw it in the way Theodore glanced at it and looked away before anyone else could. Marcy stood behind the wheelchair, not hovering, just close enough. Natalie waited near the side wall. Phoebe had not come in person but had sent a written clearance and a warning. Camden could still hear in her voice, "Do not let the emotion outrun the dog." Camden entered through the side gate first. Bishop came beside him in slow, uncertain steps, wearing the soft support sling beneath his belly. Camden held the handle lightly, not lifting unless the old Labrador needed him. Lark walked on Bishop's other side. Her body stayed close to his ribs, but she did not crowd him. She had learned Camden's house now. The water mat, the runners, the ramp, the quiet hand on Bishop's shoulder, but this courtyard was not Camden's house. The stone beneath Bishop's feet was uneven. The air held unfamiliar scents: medicine, cut shrubs, wet wool, coffee from someone's paper cup, and the faint chemical trace of Deezer. Bishop stopped 3 steps inside the gate. His cloudy eyes faced nothing in particular. His nose lifted, his ears turned, searching through the cold for a map that scent had not yet drawn. Camden slowed with him. "Easy," he said. "Stone under your feet, Lark on your right." Lark pressed her shoulder lightly against Bishop's chest. The old Labrador leaned into her. Not much, just enough to know where his body belonged. Theodore leaned forward in the wheelchair. For a moment, no one spoke. The snow made a quiet sound against the glass overhang. Somewhere inside the building, a cart rolled along a hallway and faded. Then Theodore said, "Bishop." The name came out thin, but it was still his voice. Bishop's head lifted at once. His ears moved forward. His body turned too quickly for his legs, and one rear paw slipped against the edge of a stone seam. Camden tightened his grip on the sling before the old dog could stumble. Lark moved at the same time, shoulder firm, body angled, correcting Bishop's path without force. Theodore covered his mouth with his right hand. Bishop took 1 step, then another. He was not walking toward sight. He was walking toward memory, toward a voice that had once meant food in the morning, the back door opening, the soft tap of tools on a workbench. 3 knocks after wood had been brought in from the shed. Theodore seemed to remember the same thing. His right hand lifted from his mouth and lowered to the armrest of the wheelchair. He tapped once. Bishop froze. Theodore tapped again. Lark's head turned toward the sound, her ears high. The 3rd tap came slower, longer, the way Alma had made it against the old doorframe. Theodore's hand trembled when it landed, but the rhythm survived the weakness. Bishop moved his whole body toward him. The last few steps took time. Camden kept one hand on the sling and the other free in case Bishop's legs failed. Lark stayed so close that her shoulder brushed the old dog with every breath. When Bishop reached Theodore's shoes, he lowered his muzzle and searched the leather, the laces, the hem of the blanket. Then his nose found Theodore's hand where it had slipped toward his knee. The old Labrador exhaled. His head came to rest across Theodore's lap. Theodore bent over him as far as the chair allowed. His left hand tried to move and missed, passing just above Bishop's silver muzzle. His fingers shook in the cold, or from weakness, or from the grief of not being able to do easily what love still knew how to ask. Lark saw the missed touch. She lifted her head and nudged Theodore's wrist. Not hard, not urgently, just enough to guide the hand down. Theodore's fingers found Bishop's fur. They spread slowly over the gray-white muzzle, then behind one ear. "Oh, old boy," Theodore whispered. No one answered. The moment did not need to be made larger. It was already as large as the lives that had led to it. Lark remained standing until Bishop's weight settled fully against the wheelchair. Only then did she lower herself beside Theodore's other foot, her shoulder touching Bishop's side and her back near the wheel. Her eyes moved once to Camden, then returned to Theodore's hand. Camden stepped back. That was harder than he expected. For days, Bishop's safety had depended on Camden noticing the next step, the next bowl, the next dose, the next change in breathing. He had become necessary very quickly. But in the courtyard, necessity was not the same as belonging. Theodore had earned this silence long before Camden entered the story. Natalie stood near the wall with both hands tucked into her jacket pockets. Marcy wiped one eye with her thumb and pretended she was adjusting her glasses. Theodore stroked Bishop's head in slow, uneven passes. "She's thinner," he said after a while, looking toward Lark. "She's eating better now," Camden said. "Only after him, mostly." A faint smile moved across Theodore's face and vanished. "That sounds like her." Bishop shifted, and Lark immediately raised her chest, ready to help. Camden moved half a step without thinking. Lark looked at him. The look was not suspicion now. It was assessment. Then Bishop settled again and Lark allowed Camden to stay where he was. That small permission reached him more deeply than a greeting would have. Theodore noticed the exchange. His pale eyes moved from Lark to Camden, then to the support sling beneath Bishop. "You learned how to touch him," he said. "I'm learning." That is the honest answer. Camden came closer and crouched near the wheelchair, far enough not to intrude on Bishop's head in Theodore's lap. "Dr. Larkin says Bishop can stay in hospice foster for now," Camden said. "The shelter will support his medication and follow-up while we review how he does. My house is one level. I put down runners. Evelyn, the dispatcher I told you about, has a key. Natalie will keep checking in." Theodore listened, but Camden could tell the details were not the part he was waiting for, so he gave him the harder truth. "You may not be able to take them home." The old man's hand stopped on Bishop's head. Marcy looked down but did not interrupt. Theodore stared at the snow beyond the courtyard. "I know." The words came quietly, but not suddenly. He had been walking toward them long before Camden arrived. "I used to think home was the same as fixing things," Theodore said then. "Then they put a rail beside my bed so I wouldn't fall getting up. A man understands something when a bed needs a fence." His hand moved again through Bishop's fur. "I cannot lift him if he slips. I cannot shovel the back step. Some mornings I cannot button my own shirt without making a project of it. If he needs me at 2 a.m, I might hear him and still not get there." The admission seemed to cost him more than tears would have. Lark rested her chin briefly against Bishop's side. Theodore looked at her for a long time. "She will blame herself if he falls," he said. "Dogs do that. People think they don't, but they do. Maybe not in our words. But they carry the shape of what they could not stop." Camden thought of Atlas, of the last months, of all the ways he had once believed love meant staying awake enough to prevent every pain. "You want them to stay with me," Camden said. "I want them safe," Theodore answered. "Those are not always the same sentence." Camden waited. Theodore's fingers closed gently in Bishop's fur. "If one has to move, the other goes too. To the vet, to your truck, to a different room. To the last day, if that is what it comes to. I do not want Lark behind a closed door wondering why Bishop disappeared. And I do not want Bishop searching the dark for her while people explain convenience to each other." Marcy lowered her eyes. Natalie turned toward the snow. Theodore looked directly at Camden then, old and weak and still commanding in the only way that mattered. "Can you promise that?" Camden did not answer quickly. A quick yes would have been easier. It would have sounded kinder. But promises spoken too fast were part of how Bishop and Lark had ended up alone on a porch in winter. Camden looked at Bishop's cloudy eyes, at Lark's shoulder against him, at Theodore's shaking hand. He thought of schedules, storms, department calls, medication bottles, vet visits, and the day Bishop might not be able to rise no matter how carefully the house had been prepared. Then he said, "Yes." Theodore kept looking at him. Camden repeated it, slower, "I promise. They will not be separated again because it is easier for people." The old man nodded once, that was all. But the courtyard changed around the words. The visit lasted 18 minutes. Phoebe would have approved. Bishop tired before Theodore did. His hind legs began to tremble, and Lark stood immediately, placing her body where he could lean. Camden moved in, spoke before touching him, and took part of the old dog's weight through the support sling. Theodore did not try to hold them longer. That, Camden understood, was also love. "Go on," Theodore said, his hand lingering once behind Bishop's ear. "Rest now." Bishop followed Camden's voice back across the stone, Lark beside him. At the gate, the old Labrador stopped and turned his head toward the wheelchair. Theodore raised his hand. He did not tap again. He only held it there until Bishop's nose lowered and the dogs passed through the gate. After that, the changes came without ceremony. Bishop's hospice foster became long-term care after the first review. Theodore remained listed as an approved contact for supervised visits. Marcy coordinated the schedule with Camden, Phoebe, and Natalie so no one asked Bishop to do more than his body could give. Some visits lasted 20 minutes, some lasted 7. Once, in a hard snow, Camden brought only a blanket that smelled of both dogs and sat with Theodore while the old man held it in his lap. Pine Hollow changed too. Gavin Kells did not give a speech about lessons learned. He did not ask Camden for forgiveness in a hallway or make himself the center of the correction. Instead, he revised forms, rewrote intake procedures, and made the staff slow down in the places where speed had once seemed merciful. Animals found on the same property would have linked records before they were separated into medical, behavioral, or kennel areas. Animal control notes would travel with the file, not remain buried in a separate county report. Bonded behavior would be documented before adoption listings were written. Senior medical animals would not be treated as anchors, dragging younger companions away from their chance. Sometimes the pair would still need different levels of care. But no one would pretend the bond did not exist because the paperwork became easier without it. Gavin kept Lark and Bishop's red folder on his desk for a while, not as punishment, as a weight. Colby Madsen came once to the shelter after Theodore asked him to sign additional consent forms. He was younger than Camden had imagined, in his mid-30s, with tired eyes, a work jacket stained at the cuffs and the restless shame of a man who wanted to explain without sounding like he was excusing himself. "I thought I had time," Colby said. Gavin, who had no room to judge cleanly, only answered, "They had nights." Colby looked down. Nothing more dramatic happened. No arrest, no public disgrace. Just a man standing in the place where his delay had become visible. Weeks passed. Winter deepened and then softened at its edges. Camden's house changed in ways small enough that a stranger might not notice. Medication bottles stood beside the coffee tin. A towel basket lived near the back door. The thick rug beside Camden's chair belonged to Bishop now, and Camden no longer tried to reclaim it. Lark's bed remained nearby, though she often chose the floor between Bishop and the room. The gray-blue blanket stayed clean enough to be safe, and familiar enough to matter. Camden learned Bishop's good mornings, the ones when the old Labrador found the water mat with only a word and ate slowly but completely. He learned the harder ones too, when Bishop stood with his head lowered, unsure whether his legs would agree to the day. He learned that Lark still woke at almost every shift in Bishop's breathing, but not always all the way. That was progress. One bright afternoon, snow fell in pieces so light they seemed suspended outside the window. Bishop slept on the rug near Camden's chair, his silver muzzle resting on one front paw. Lark lay close along his back, eyes half closed. Camden sat at the kitchen table dividing the evening pills into a small dish. His black wristwatch ticked softly against the wood. Bishop stirred. It was a small movement, a paw sliding, a breath changing. Once, Lark would have risen before the sound finished. This time, Camden stood first. "Hand on your shoulder," he said, crossing the room. Bishop lifted his head toward the voice. "Water on your left. 1 step." Camden placed his palm gently along the old dog's shoulder and guided him toward the runner. Bishop followed, slow but steady. His paws found the textured mat. He drank, paused, then turned back with Camden's hand still there. Lark opened her eyes. She watched them reach the rug. She watched Bishop lower himself with a long, tired sigh. Camden stayed beside him until the old dog settled. Only then did Lark let her head sink back down. Her eyes remained on Camden for one more second. Then they closed. The house grew quiet around them, but not empty. Beyond the windows, White Harbor lay under its bright winter snow. Somewhere far off, a plow truck moved along the county road. Lark's ears flicked once, then relaxed. Bishop slept. Camden sat back in his chair and listened to the ordinary sounds he had once feared inviting into his life again. Breathing, water in a bowl, old paws shifting on a rug, a dog trusting that another heart had finally joined the watch. Lark no longer had to keep guard alone. Sometimes healing does not arrive as a grand miracle. Sometimes it comes quietly, through a bowl of water placed where it can be found, a hand resting gently on an old shoulder, or someone choosing not to leave another heart behind. Lark, Bishop, Camden, and Theodore remind us that love is not always about holding on. Sometimes love means making sure no one has to face the dark alone. If this story touched something in your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about someone, human or animal, who helped you keep going. And if you value stories of loyalty, grace, and quiet courage, please subscribe and stay with us. May your home be blessed with peace, patient love, and the kind of hope that finds you even after loss.